is Arsen Tatagosyan, and today I'm going to be talking about the Beatles and how they were able to revolutionize music. With 20 number one hits, the Beatles were able to revolutionize music in a way that was unprecedented at the time and is still unprecedented to this day. In the 1960s, the Beatles were the most dominant force in the whole world in music, and still hasn't been able to imitate that. Any musician has not been able to imitate that kind of dominance to this day. Not even Michael Jackson, not Nirvana, not even Drake. Musicians that you listen to this day, doesn't matter what genre, from rock to hip hop to R&B, are influenced by the Beatles in one way or another. If it's by recording, or if it's by the sounds that they made, or how they culturally were viewed. So, I'm sure most of you know the Beatles and have heard a few of their songs, but not many of you may know how the Beatles were able to get so big. Some of you may be asking, how are four Englishmen in their 20s in Lancaster, London, able to get to or Liverpool, London, my mistake, able to get so big and take over the world within a few years? Well, I'll tell you. In 1957, Paul McCartney and John Lennon met and made the Beatles. At that time, a few months later, they met George Harrison, Pete Best, Stuart Schiff, and Ringo Starr and created the Beatles as a whole. Now, the Beatles at that time were your local favorite band at a bar you would go see, at a bar or at a restaurant. People enjoyed them, but they were only big around Liverpool, not much outside of Liverpool, not even in England, not in Scotland, nor in the UK. Now, the Beatles, they went through different crew members, different musicians throughout the early 60s and the late 50s, and dabbled within different members in the band. They weren't able to find a good footing in themselves. But in 1961, they met a man by the name of Brian Epstein. Now, Brian Epstein worked for music, worked in a lot of audio and recording companies, and when he met them at a local pub, he instantly fell in love with their music. He took the risk after that by becoming their manager. A few months after meeting Epstein, they were able to sign to Parflone. Now, excuse me if I mistake that or say it mistakenly. Parflone, which is run by EMI Group. Parflone is a recording studio. So they were able to get a record deal. After that, the Beatles were slowly able to grow up and increase in their rankings to listeners. At that time, Parflone was run by George Martin. George Martin gave them the suggestion of putting Ringo Starr as the lead drummer, and by kicking out Sutcliffe and Best. After that, the Beatles band changed forever. They had a totally different sound and a totally different style. They went from the normal British rock to a more American, upbeat, fast-paced tempo. That was new to England. That hadn't been heard in England. That was what made the Beatles pop in England. I'm sure many of you have also heard of A Hard Day's Night, very famous song. Well, A Hard Day's Night is also a movie, and that movie is what it was able to get the Beatles big worldwide. The movie was recorded in England, but was shown all across the world in theaters, from America to the Middle East to Europe, all over the world. Now, The Hard Day's Night was not just a movie and with just that song. It also had a lot of their music that had been recorded before in the movie. So after that, people went and saw the movie, listened to the songs in the movie, and started to look for the songs in the movie. That's how the Beatles were able to get so big. So now I talked to you about how the Beatles were able to get big. Now let me tell you what made them big. Why did people want to listen to them so much? One of the ways that the Beatles used, one of the techniques that the Beatles used was called looping. Looping is when you basically, it's hard to explain, but when you get a certain sound, you record a certain sound, and you constantly play it on repeat. It doesn't have to be fast, but you just replay it throughout the song. You can do it forward or you can do it backwards. Now, this was never used in music before that. Before that, tracks had one certain sound, or one certain playlist, you can call it, and just played it throughout the song, and someone would sing. But by the Beatles, they were able to make a sound and replay it, and it just changed the way music was viewed and the way music sounded. Another way that the Beatles changed music was by using audio feedback. Now, audio feedback is the technique of when someone plays, for say, the guitar, or it hits the drum right next to the amplifier. It makes a really loud boom or a really loud ringing sound, right? I'm sure you guys have heard of that in music nowadays. So before the Beatles, not many musicians had used that. One band did here and there. They were called the Kinks, also a famous band. You guys may have heard of them. But they never intentionally used them. And they were never used them to the extent of the Beatles. So when the Beatles used that in their first song, I Feel Fine, you can hear Ringo Starr on the first note, bangs his drum right by the amplifier and creates a huge boom sound, followed by about a ringing sound that lasts about 5 to 10 seconds. This, when played to a crowd, creates a source of, amplifies them, creates a source of excitement, gets them moving, as they like to say. So those are how the Beatles were able to change music itself. Today I've talked to you about how the Beatles were able to get big, and about how the Beatles changed music from recording to the singing and to how it was viewed. And musicians to this day, whether it's country or it's hip hop or it's R&B, you name it, doesn't matter the genre. It can be Drake, it can be Madonna, it can be J. Cole or The Weeknd or Ariana Grande. They all are inspired by the Beatles, not just the sound, but how they want to dress and how they want to be viewed. And in my opinion, I do not see any band or any musician coming as close as the Beatles were able to get in the 1960s.